Hello, I'm Laurel Nicholson, the creator and founder of the Death and Resurrection Doula Training Program. Welcome to this conversation on my podcast. I'd like to introduce my husband, Ed Nicholson, and we have decided to take some time and share on my channel a little bit of his mother's story. I was an end of life doula to his family before we became engaged and got married, and she died about 2 weeks ago. And so we have had quite a journey together. And you'll hear by the end of this podcast, it's a beautiful journey and God's faithfulness, even when things are overwhelming, his faithfulness is present. And despite some of the challenges that the family faced in getting the right amount of care for their mother with her increasing dementia, she had a really, really good end of life and was surrounded by Christians in not just her family, but also in the assisted living facility and with the hospice care team. So we just thought this was something really that we should share and another way to highlight the value of hiring an end of life doula, particularly a Christian end of life doula. So I'm going to give Ed a minute to introduce himself. Hey, Ed.
Hi, honey. My name's Ed Nicholson. I grew up in New Jersey. I've been a musician most of my career as a professional musician. I've toured and played lots of different places. I have been blessed to have that kind of a career, and and I lived in New Jersey most of my life. And I met Laurel a couple years ago,
Several years ago,
several
I was
years
living in New
ago.
York City.
She was living in New York City, and we were introduced. And at that point in time, my mother was living in a house which was owned by a church, and the church was a church parsonage, actually. And my mom and dad had lived there for about 30 years. My dad had passed away. My mother had been without my father for over 30 years, but my mother had still lived in the same house. Um, and and her living conditions were not really the best. I at one point in time ended up moving back in with my mother, and at that point in time, just realized like how dire her situation was. She was living on one floor of her home. She wasn't able to go up and down stairs. The people that owned the house, there really was no way to like modify her living space to get her upstairs. So she was basically confined to one floor of her house. She was using a commode for a bathroom, and she was basically just washing herself in the sink. I remember there were tons of times I would wash my mother's hair for her, and so it was not a good situation. So at that point in time, my brothers and I were kind of looking for how do we find a better living space for my mother? And we were really struggling with that. I was going through a challenging time in my life, and my two brothers don't live in New Jersey anymore. They live at opposite ends of the United States. One lives as far south as you can go, and the other lives as far west as you can go. So it was very difficult for them to kind of comprehend. So I was kind of even though they were helping me, I was kind of on my own. So when I met Laurel and was introduced to her, she told me about her ministry, that she was an end of life doula. I had no idea what that was. I didn't even know what the word doula meant or anything. I was like kind of curious. I thought that was kind of like a new age thing. And so I was kind of confused by it. But she was able to explain that to me, and I ended up going back to my brothers and saying to them, we actually had a Zoom call one day, and I went back to them, and I remember telling my brothers like, uh, you're incapable and you're incapable, and I'm definitely incapable of figuring this out on my own. And I've met this woman. She is very skilled and knows a lot about end of life and just what we need to do, even as far as transitioning my mother into a assisted living place, which at that time we didn't even know how to do that. We didn't really. My mother had kind of managed her estate on her own, so we didn't really know like her plans or anything, and had never really discussed that. Um, so that's where Laurel kind of came in, and she was able to help us right away. So we hired her on a monthly basis to meet with my mom to help us get all of uh, her paperwork and everything in order. She helped us find a lawyer. We ended up hiring a lawyer because we needed some legal things done. And so it was a blessing.
It was a blessing. And I do like to tell those who I train, when we form a relationship with a family, um, Ed and I had no romantic relationship at that time at all. And so, but God is good. And through the work that I did with him, we formed a friendship. I had been through a rough divorce. He was in the middle of a rough divorce, and we were able to be very very friendly with one another, and supportive in uh, things around faith and God's faithfulness to us, even in difficult circumstances. And his family was facing multiple difficult circumstances, and I felt really blessed as a Christian to be able to um, be a part of the family, and help them navigate the challenges that come with having an aging parent at home. And moving into an assisted living facility isn't always the next step for a family, when or moving your parent into a facility when things at home seem a little bit tough. But the specific circumstances for this family, and you know boundaries that were in place, it was really the only option for Ed's mother. And that was not really a difficult thing on behalf of an end of life doula, to find a couple options and to coordinate visits. And at that point, Ed's mom was still somewhat mobile. With assistance, we were able to get her into or out of the house, into the car, and take her to tour a few facilities, and even go out for lunch and make a day of it. And so that was relatively the easy part. Getting his brothers on board was the easy part. Once we selected, the what seemed like the best facility through the tours that we had been on, and there were several parts of the parts that met that criteria, and one that it was during COVID, and the way that some of the facilities felt was a turnoff to Ed, and to his mother. His brothers weren't there at that time in person, but we kept them updated on everything. And of course, what is the cost? One of those things that was tough around COVID is staffing. What are you guys doing with your staffing? What are your long-term goals with your staffing, with hygiene? So those were really important questions to think about, particularly during COVID. What are your, requirements for residents? So we selected one of three that we toured, and I made a fantastic relationship with the director of sales. And it actually took the entire family one whole year to make the decision that it was time to move his mom. And she did not have any real signs of dementia that her sons noticed when we were first beginning that investigation of what are the next steps for her and her living situation. But the place that we chose had a full spectrum of care. That when she did begin to show signs of cognitive decline, according to her assessments, they had a room available for her for an upward level of care with memory care. So it really seemed to be that everything was moving in a good direction, with having found a place and having the family have these conversations and making a good relationship with someone on the staff at the assisted living facility. And so when the time came that things really began to become dramatically clear that it was time for, no matter what his mother wanted, she really didn't want to go into a facility. So that makes the decision for the family, extra hard. But everyone came to an agreement, and the grandchildren were the ones that actually
That's
were
right.
able to talk with your mom and
Yeah.
say, "Hey, Grandma, we care about you so much, and we want better for you." And they got the job done. They really
Yeah. They
helped
really
your
do.
your mother take that next step, and everyone was involved in some form or fashion with the move, whether it was filling out forms or actually doing the heavy lifting, or helping pay for the move. So everyone really got involved, and we got your mom into a better situation where you know something we might not think about very often, which is the showers. Sink bathing was had its limits, and she had some infections that were recurring, and getting her out to the doctor was a challenge.
Yeah.
Organizing
Actually, when I
rides.
think about it, I mean, we actually first got her some in-home care, but the expense of that was so much that we just decided everyone decided that still wasn't working, even though they did a good job. We weren't able to get the frequency, and then that's when we
They did a good job, but your mom was canceling them.
yeah,
She would
yeah, I
call
remember
the
that.
aide that
Yeah.
was coming that day and say, "I don't need your help today." And with these in-home services, typically there's a minimum that you have to meet in order to have these services. So it got complicated. But even with extra help, there was the plumbing, probably was the biggest issue, was not having
Yeah,
a bathroom in
yeah.
the downstairs. And so I think maybe one of the biggest reliefs of getting your mom into the facility was to be able to have, caregivers who could really shower her and help her with
Mm,
with her hygiene,
yep.
and have meals and have company, with those meals. Because many times, she would receive Meals on Wheels. People would just leave it on the doorstep, and she'd
Remember
have
the
to
Meals on Wheels?
do.
Oh,
She'd have to get herself out to the step and pick these things up. So it really did change her quality of living
mm,
in a dynamic way
yeah.
overnight.
Yeah, when she got into the facility, even though she did not wanna participate, there were people around if she went out, um, to breakfast or lunch or dinner, there were people there, and she did make some friends at that first facility that she was in. She made some friends there, and she would when I would come to see her, they I would find her with the friends.
Hmm.
Um,
Well, and there was a piano, and your mom is was a skilled pianist and
PMS, yeah,
organist,
yeah.
and there were some at points at which she was able to play and enjoy
Yeah,
enjoy that, but she really retained the attitude that she did not want to be in a
yeah,
facility.
she did, telling us that she wanted to go home, and that's I think that's just a typical reaction. But, I mean, it also showed me, like, looking back now on the whole journey with my mom, it showed me how important, like, your services were at the beginning, and I don't think a lot of people realize that when you're trying to navigate, a lot of families just don't have the time or the knowledge or the resources, and the dual services are, you know, kind of more of an inexpensive way, in my estimation, to kind of uh, streamline bringing everything together so that it makes the end of life easier when you know
Well, one thing I think your family would agree upon was it was really hard to have conversations with your
yeah,
family, with one another, about the fact that mom needs some care and attention on a new level.
yeah,
And it's uncomfortable oftentimes, because that conversation means my mom is aging. My mom's not going to get better. Things are going to continue to be challenging. And I really don't want to talk about it. I really would like to push this to the side and say things aren't so bad. But they were, and they weren't terrible at that point, but they could have gotten to that
Mm.
point. So it was a good time to have a conversation. And then also just collecting documents. You know, your mom was really organized. She had worked for a lawyer at some point in her
Yeah.
life, and so she loved files and to be organized. And so she had a great binder already put together with end of life
Yeah.
the documents, such as her advance directive,
Yeah.
which you had seen because you were on you were your healthcare power of attorney. But when I was sorting through her things, I found she had further discussions with her physician and filled out something called a pulse form. And it was in opposition to what you knew that care that she wanted
Yeah.
that she had originally put on her advance directive. And you, as her healthcare power of attorney, would have clarified, her care wishes for the care
Yeah. It
team in
was
the
kind
event
of,
she wasn't able to. And so that came as a surprise to you. Your mom had not had that conversation with you. And
uh,
so just diving into some of these particulars will open up, a lot of blind spots that families might not be aware
mm,
of. And one thing I really love about my work as an end of life doula, and particularly as being a Christian, is that, with grace and with faith in God and the hope of heaven and the hope of resurrection, bringing the context of Christianity into these conversations. And you have a very strong Christian family. Your
mm,
father was a pastor, and your brothers are strong believers, and you guys were able to rely on your faith to have these conversations. And as a private doula that your family hired, I was free to be able to have these conversations with you guys about these difficult subjects with the context of faith.
yeah. But even navigating the faith journey, knowing that my mother had that was a strong thing for her, even when we were looking at facilities, especially up in the Northeast, we found that a lot of the facilities just had no level of faith-based attention,
Mm,
programs, anything like that. So that was difficult because we went to a couple different facilities and there were no, we asked them, "Do you have chapel on Sunday?" And they looked at us and they were like, we had three heads, and so it was interesting navigating that. And then with having my mom down south more, it was interesting because, we see a total difference. And I don't know whether that's regional or
mm.
what that is, but that it was helpful to have you there to help us navigate,
Let
that.
let's get to that, her move down south. But first, I just want to clarify that, once we had her settled, which was a family effort and a big effort on her part, she was able to have some visitors from the church, and you,
Hmm.
could come by. But still, I think there's a little weight that you felt on your shoulders because you're the son that lived locally, and so you were primarily a caregiver. You weren't doing the incontinence care and showering, but you were, a caregiver to your mother, and so
Mm,
that posed a heavy burden for you.
mm,
And still we were in, close friendship and professional relationship of, talking through, these experiences that you were having,
mm,
and I just want to, encourage anyone who has a parent who's aging, and perhaps because of proximity, you're the closest one to them, and it feels like a heavy burden, that it is, it may truly be. And, how does the Lord work in that? He's not abandoned us. And he's provided people for us. And sometimes we need to, reach out and find those people, or make sure they know they need to reach out to us and get in to our community. And we saw a beautiful thing with your mom's community, a few people she had taught piano with, and another man at the church,
mm.
would help with some visits, and, picking her up and taking her to a doctor's appointment. Because no matter, how expensive you find the assisted facilities to be, and the skilled nursing facilities, some things you still have to pay for outside of that, like,
Oh, yeah.
being picked up and taken to the
Yeah,
doctor's
yeah,
office. I mean, there are
lots of
certain
things.
things that just overwhelming to a family. So that, that's another thing that falls on the caregiver is who is going to do this. I have a job and I, am at work and I live, 30 minutes from my mother's, residence. And
Yeah.
so all these are a lot to balance with the caregiver. Maybe we'll pause on your mom's story for a sec and talk about our story a little bit and how the Lord began to work in our friendship and move towards something more serious towards marriage. We were both surprised at that, even though I think you were. maybe maybe you want to say something.
No, I mean, I just think it was, you know our relationship evolved out of a friendship, like you said, that we had built. We both were divorced. My divorce had just become kind of finalized when we even, you know, of course, you're a attractive uh, woman, and I was interested in you, and I had a close friendship. We had, we talked a couple times a week, and a lot of that discussion was about my mother, and we were involved in some other things that, ministry opportunities that God was doing in us, and then
Right.
one day,
You invited me into some
yeah,
things with your ministry. I invited you into some
yeah,
things and you really began to be a supporter of what I do as an
yeah,
impact doula. You had
absolutely,
received the benefits
yeah,
of hiring someone who does come
yeah,
alongside to serve families and these uh, difficult challenges, particularly because as we talked about from the beginning, where do you start, right? Do you start
yeah,
with talking to my sibling who doesn't live here and then they don't necessarily see what I'm seeing? And that was a little bit of the response you got was, I think she's going to be okay. And you're like, well, I'm seeing it, many times a week and this is
yeah,
going to have to change, right? So
yeah,
so getting people all on the same page is delicate
yeah,
often. And so you really fell in love with my ministry and being a believer and having spent years in the church as a worship minister, you saw, wow, families could really use this. And so I,
benefit.
I invited you into some part of my ministry, particularly in relation to moving towards setting up a training program. And you had some, other things that I could explore as well as I, worked on building my ministry. And so anyway, we made the decision that the Lord was calling us to, the blessing of marriage. And so we decided to move your mom to Virginia before you moved down to Virginia.
Yeah, that was,
That's a
pretty
special
much,
doula.
yeah.
That was a special doula
God really
thing.
kind of laid the groundwork for us, for our relationship, and we both saw that, but my mother made it down here before I did,
She did. Yeah.
and she went to another facility that was associated with the facility in New Jersey, and, once again, my the family did a great job of kind of bonding together and working together to get my mom here, and, and then I was able to come a few months later when Laurel and I got married, and, and then, um, you know, that journey began here in Virginia, and that was a challenge too, but you can see the steps that were taken to get my mom into the facility down here and then to get her adjusted and then to have the support mechanism here because of my relationship with you and your family being here and have that support mechanism.
Mhm. Right.
I was still in a very fluctuous environment in New Jersey. I basically became homeless at one point in time and didn't have anywhere else to go. Um, and we had planned on getting married anyhow, so we just kind of moved things up a little bit. We got married, and and the rest is, you
Well,
know,
when your mom arrived in
yeah,
Virginia, If she had stayed in New Jersey, they had said the next step would be to move to a memory care
Yeah,
room.
and she was actually thinking back, my mother was in hospice at that
Right.
point in time. They had to put her into hospice in New Jersey, and she had entered hospice, and she was declining at that point in time. She had dropped a lot of weight, and so it looked like she was could be entering the end, and they were thinking about moving her. Her dementia started at that point in time, so they were thinking about moving her into a place
Right. A
there.
memory care
Memory care.
to the memory care floor, same building, just different floor, would
Yeah,
have been a different team of, staff. But it was a good time to move her to Virginia. Of course, they do another assessment, at the new facility, and they also assessed her for memory care. So she moved into a memory care room, went from a private apartment in assisted living into a shared room, and really
but they took her off a hospice
they
at that
took her
point
off of hospice because she
because
rebounded and with weight.
and I think because the criteria is different from state to state, and now that I am in the hospice business, I've learned a lot about that, but we
Mm,
can talk about that
right.
later. But it was interesting because my mom got here and we didn't know a lot of things. And now that we're dealing with my mother's estate, there's a lot of things that are financially burdens
Mm,
put on the family, which is why you really need to, once again, just really be communicating
mm,
with the facility, talking to people, and be careful because the facility that we moved my mother into down here did not have I kept asking them, do you guys have Medicaid beds? Because my mother was basically using her estate to pay down, like, to finance her living in the facility, and
which was
this,
very
which was
expensive.
very expensive.
Right.
And I knew she was going to run out of money at some point in time. So we really wanted to know that there were Medicaid beds because she would have to transition from Medicare to Medicaid at some point in time. And what ended up happening was my mother ran out of money, and then the facility said, "We don't have any Medicaid beds."
Right. But
And
let's not get there yet because
yeah,
I
yeah,
want to talk
yeah.
about while she was at the memory care
Yep,
facility.
yep, yep.
She continued to decline because moving is hard. And she
Yeah,
moved across state. I mean, I don't think she
yeah,
really
she
fully
did.
understood she became a Virginia resident.
No,
And then actually you realized when you were enrolling in Medicaid that all of the complex things going on, your family, you guys didn't she didn't really become a Virginia resident.
no,
We changed her mailing address and,
but
on
she
the
never
forms,
became
and
a
that was really it. And she wasn't voting and didn't need a driver's license.
no.
So that detail was left out amidst the complications of everything going on. But she continued to decline, and then it seemed like she plateaued a bit, and so that plateau was sort of just in being pretty miserable. And
Yeah,
like,
because she might have gained weight, but her dementia set in a lot further in when she moved down here. And
yeah.
that's a declining thing. And knowing what I know about hospice now, it's not weight gain or loss that just dictates whether or not you're on hospice. It's a lot of it are the other onset things that lead to decline, which are dementia,
Mm,
heart problems, breathing problems, which my mother had. Um, and so a lot of that
mm.
plays a factor in it.
Well, your mom being, I mean, miserable is not a great word, but I think it's the right word.
It is the right word. Yeah.
And that was really hard
Mm.
to know that, you know, your mom seemed to be declining towards end of life in a way that you she never would have wanted. You wouldn't have wanted that for her.
No.
But with the logistics of your family, you know, having her in a memory care facility was the only option that
Yeah.
seemed, to be available for her
Reason.
health,
Yeah.
safety, and hygiene and
Yeah.
all of those important things. And so it tests your faith, tests your family faith. Like, why is my mom lingering? We know she would rather be with the Lord. We know she misses my father, but it kind of seemed like there was this period where it just seemed like, will this go on forever a
Yeah.
little bit? And we know the Bible says like we long to be with God. And so it's really hard to see someone that you love so much enduring
Mm.
the decline and dementia and her um, irritability and just total misery
Mm.
about being in a place that she really didn't want to be and didn't really know where she was. The staff was really sweet. She seemed to get along with her roommate. Like those weren't the challenges. It was just the emotional and spiritual challenge of hardship. I mean, a trial in her life. Our trials and tribulations continue, even if we're elderly and in a memory care unit. And so it was a real trial and tribulation for her. And watching that and not having the capacity to financially to make it better. And so she runs out of her money, and challenges around that. You got to hire a lawyer to get help with the Medicaid application, and again that fell on your shoulders,
Mm.
became your burden.
And at that point in time, I was getting doula services for free.
Yes, you
So
were.
because my doula had become my wife, and that was very helpful because a lot of those things that I would have had to have navigated on my own that I didn't know the answers to,
Right.
you were able to help me
Well, the emotional
navigate
support is a
those.
huge
Yeah.
factor, and particularly when the burden falls to you, and you've still got work
Yeah.
and, family obligations and,
Yeah.
stressful things on top of you, and your own trials, right? And then to
Yeah.
take on, the burden of your mother who cannot do these things for herself at
Yeah.
all. And sometimes, you walk in her room and she's not happy to even see you.
Yeah.
And, that's hard. And, so the whole journey of aging along with your parents as they're aging and bearing that responsibility is very
And then
challenging.
the pressure that comes with being, I was the caregiver at that point in time, and I was the one who started. I was kind of left on my own. The facilities make you feel like you're gonna have some help, but then they kind of abandon you when it
Right.
comes to, well, your parents
Well,
out
you
of
had to hire a lawyer to deal
private.
with the facility.
Boy,
I mean,
yeah,
that was
yeah,
your family situation. Is
yeah,
there were
yeah.
some,
Well,
increases on the bill that were not explained, and the
yeah,
money did drain faster than you expected.
yeah.
And then there was no Medicaid bed. And so then
So then we had to scramble to find a Medicaid bed,
and the wait list
and
everywhere
yeah,
where we live,
everywhere.
100 people, 50 people. That
Yeah,
was the answer. We got
we have a
50
2-year
people.
wait list.
Right. And you think, what am I going to do? And the facility was sending letters saying that if you don't have your mother move to a new place, like, we cannot keep her here. Right. So that becomes, another burden. And in your case, hiring a lawyer was really the right step. And she was fantastic.
Yeah.
And praise the Lord. And I don't remember why you decided to call 45 minutes away, but you did. And you
Yeah,
found
one day I just decided I'm looking in the wrong place, so I looked in the opposite direction, and as soon
they
as
had a
I
bed.
called the facility, they said, "We have a bed. We have plenty of beds." And, not as nice a place, a more state-run facility. It's still a private facility, but more, Medicaid beds and, long-term care patients that, didn't have the resources to do private pay and stuff. So, but great people, great staff. That's one of the things I would tell people to watch for is, just because a facility looks good doesn't mean the staff is good. Because in my opinion, if it looks good, the staff is probably not that great. If it's doesn't look good, then that means they really care about their staff and they really care about having a good staff, and that's where they spend their money on. And
Mm,
so it might look like a hospital, it might not look like much, but the level of care is going to be there. And that's what I found
mm.
when my mother moved to this more state run place, which actually was in a beautiful,
Beautiful town.
beautiful
Beautiful
town in
town.
Virginia. And, the people there were local people. They cared for my mom. They took better care than the facility she was spending $14,000 a month at. They actually took better care of her at this facility. And to this day, I have a great relationship with the people there.
Mm,
So
right.
that's a real
Y-
that's a real
right.
eye opener.
Well, and your mom perked up a bit. She
Yeah.
was more mobile than
Yeah,
she
she
had
became
been.
very I remember I at the one facility, she would stay in her room, she would never go to meals, everything was brought to her. They complained about her actually because they're like, she won't come out to meals, she won't do this, she won't do that. And then she moved, an hour away from us. And the first time I came over there to visit her, she said, I was like to the nurse, I went to the nurse's station and I was like, where's my mom? She's not in her room. And they're like, oh, she's never in her room. And she was actually way far down the hall.
Mm,
And I was like, how did you get there? And they go,
mm.
she just
Yeah.
scoots herself around in her wheelchair and she gets to where she's got to go. And that's pretty much the way she was for the 9 months
That she was there.
she
And,
was out.
as her dementia advanced, we began to notice she was less, for a period, she was a little bit, less miserable about her surroundings. And you would
Mm.
think, we took a step like on as a, book cover might be judged, took a step down
Yeah.
in the facility, but your mom actually became a little bit more um
Social.
social. She definitely
More
did. Yeah.
social, she got better care, way better care.
Way better
I
care.
mean, my mother was showered, her hair was done. They even, she would do her nails the
In the
best she could
activity
do
room.
them
Yeah.
in the activity room. They had things going on for her. She was, eating and, they were just, it was just a better environment for my mother and a more faith-based environment too. So, which I thought was important.
It
And,
made a
you know,
difference. It did make it really
and then
made a
to and
difference.
then just, you know, toward the end of my mother's life when hospice came in, and
Let's
that was
talk about that because I want to say, one thing you really struggled with prior to hospice and how the Lord worked that out. And you shared the healthcare power of attorney with your brother.
yeah,
So
with
you
my
guys
brother.
were, communicating about any changes in her health. And but one of the things that was like ethically challenging was the question. My mom's been on these medications, some of them since she was 60, and you
Yeah,
wanted,
they
she
were
was
life
moved to
sustaining.
palliative care,
Yeah.
and you said to the palliative care doctor, "Are these sustaining my mom's life?" Right? And I was really surprised at her answer. And what she told you was that she told you that no, they weren't sustaining your mom's life, but that they were preventing a stroke, for instance, and that with dementia, you can live a really long time bedridden after having a stroke. And so your mom being more social again
Yeah.
and a little bit, able to get herself
Yeah.
around, that for her to remain on those medications to prevent a catastrophic stroke or something that put her in the bed and she could still live for, many
And
years
that's pretty
was
much
better.
that was
Th-
better. She
And
stayed that
so we
way.
said, okay, but still it was a challenge for you. Like, am I
Yeah, you
keeping my
question,
mother?
am I keeping my mother alive? You want the transition to be peaceful. I never wanted my mother to be in pain, or you wanted her to be peaceful. You wanted it to be um, a good transition to eternity. I mean, basically, um, and that's really what happened
So
at the
your
end.
mom started refusing the medications
Yeah, she
and
started actually hiding the
hiding.
medication.
Right. And that
They
you
would
got a
put
call.
Yeah, and I got a call from them and they said, "Hey, we think it's your mom's starting to decline. She's hiding the medication, she's spitting it out. We're finding it in her room." Her dementia had really fully kind of kicked in toward the end, and she still knew who I was. She still knew who Laurel was, but she was not happy, and she just kept talking about like wanting to go
Well,
to
they
heaven.
increased her
Yeah.
antidepressants, they told
Yeah.
you, and she seemed pretty lethargic on
Yeah.
our visits.
Yes.
And so the move to hospice was swift.
Yeah.
I don't think you were expecting it.
No.
We kind of just expected. We don't know how much longer this will go
Yeah.
on, but we're here. We're on the journey with her, and then you got the call, and you had just started working for hospice,
Yeah. I
taken
just
on a
did.
role of
Yeah.
music therapist, which is really special. And we
Yeah.
should come back and do a whole
Yeah.
nother episode about that. But let's talk about getting her into hospice, and that was really, really, it probably went better than anything we've done with your mom at
Yes.
all since
For
I've known
sure.
you for, 4 years.
For sure. Yeah, my mother, the transition, I got the call from the facility and they said, we think it's time for your mom to enter hospice. She's on the decline. We see weight loss. We see her dementia, really, the confusion and everything really coming in. They have all these, gauges that they keep. Now that I work for hospice, I see those gauges of like where the progression is at. And so yeah, it was a quick process. I mean, they asked me, we're going to put her on hospice, and they asked me who I wanted to use, and I was like, well, you better use the people I work for. So which actually was an advantage for me because I got a lot of updates and things. The nursing staff and the aides really kept me
Mm,
in the loop as far as what was going on and stuff. And they do. A good hospice company will keep you in the loop.
mm.
You know what I mean? They'll be very communicative and very responsive. That's one of the thing. Um, Medi Hospice, if you hear the name,
Medical Services of America.
Medical Services of America, I'll give them a plug right now, but they are very, very good
Mm.
at response, and from the top up, from the doctors to the nurses to the staff, everybody responded. It was a matter of days, and my mother was in hospice. She was
She was getting her regular visits. They
yeah,
started morphine,
yeah,
but they kept you up to date on all of this, and
yeah.
that's often really hard for families because morphine seems scary.
Yeah, well,
And
that was, but that even didn't happen right away. They started out with my mom. I think my mom had 2 aides and a nurse every week.
right,
And during that I think it's 5 weeks that she was on hospice. And so,
total,
yeah,
yeah,
total. So, and the other thing is to let people know, a lot of people think hospice is the end. It's not. We have clients that work that are part of our hospice, part of hospice for our company. Some of them have been on hospice for years.
right.
They're just in decline
And they're not seeking
and they're not
curative
seeking
treatments,
curative
but
treatment.
it doesn't mean that their quality of life
No,
is not the
no,
first and foremost
no.
what's
It,
important.
it,
And they can actually have extended life with a
yeah,
higher quality of
yeah,
life.
because the rebound, and that's something that I could add is even when mom was in New Jersey, when she went on hospice, there
She,
was a rebound because she was getting extra
right,
care and it helped her life get better.
right.
So, and so a lot of times that is, but I will say our staff did a great job. Yes, when my mother went on, had to start going on morphine, they were very explained it to me. It's about comfort care at that point in time. A lot of it seems very scary. And I will tell you, I made the mistake of at one point in time, I wanted my mother to wake up because I wanted to have a conversation with her. And the nurse from the facility had come in, not our hospice nurse, but she said, do you want me to give your mom morphine? And my mother was sleeping at that time. And I was like, no, wait, we'll see how. But then my mother kind of woke up and the hospice nurse came in and my mother was very agitated. She was trying to throw herself out of the bed. And it was scary. It was not something I wanted to see. And so I remember Sarah, our nurse from hospice, got my mom calmed down, got the medication working again, and my mom went back to sleep. And she stayed sleeping until she passed.
And
And
hospice explained to you
yeah,
the
and
doses of morphine were small,
they were really small
and
doses of morphine,
and
but
that
they keep my mother comfortable.
and that it was okay for her to
Yeah,
sleep out the last
yeah.
days. And she was, you know, she was sleeping, but that doesn't mean that she didn't know you were there
No,
and she didn't hear your voice and, wasn't aware
no,
of some of the things going on. She wasn't sedated or anything. She
no.
just was sleeping comfortably.
And at that point in time, we were going to see my mother every day pretty
Hmm.
much
Hmm.
there. And then I was able to go the day that my mother passed. And, I was able to go and sing
And
for
sing
my
for her.
mom. And then, you know, um, it was just a quick story about that. I sang for my mom. The hospice nurse came in, our weekend nurse, Natasha, came in, and my mother, her heart stopped beating for 15 seconds. And then my eyes welled up. I thought she was gone. And all of a sudden she started breathing again. And Natasha looked at me and she said, sometimes that happens, and she said, sometimes this could go on for hours. So at that point in time, Laurel and I decided we'd go grab some lunch and maybe come back to the facility. And so we did that, but then we decided to go home.
We prayed about it. We
Yeah,
said,
we
should we
prayed.
go
Yeah,
back? And we decided to go home and perhaps come back in the
yeah,
evening because the hospice nurse, she came by and was, beyond explaining about the morphine, which is oftentimes hard for families. She, showed you your mother's feet and what she was checking to see
yeah,
how close is your mother getting
yeah.
towards her last
And she
breath,
said
right?
she was getting
And
close.
she showed you, right? She
Yeah.
showed you her feet and the modeling, and it was just really clear about it. And I think you really
No,
appreciated
I
that.
did,
It helped
because
prepare you
yeah,
emotionally, spiritually, that, your mom was
yeah,
really nearing.
yeah. And then we decided to go home, and we were driving over the mountain, and Natasha gave me a text message, and she said, my mother had passed.
Mm.
And so, but it was peaceful. And that's another
And we
thing
turned around and went
that
back.
information to share with people is, Natasha told me, she said, this is just surmising death, that a lot of times with parents, if you're in the room, your parent doesn't want to die. They don't want to leave. That covering of being a parent, it's still there. And so they will fight to stay alive. And so who knows? I left the facility and my mom passed at that
Mm.
point in time. And so then I was able to grieve and came back and spent some time with my mother there. They had dressed her body, which is another thing. That facility did a great job.
Mm.
I was, her roommate was moved out of the room. I was there with my mom alone, and Laurel was able to come in with me, and we were able to just pray and spend some time with my mom's body. And so there was a lot of closure there. So
And it was evident that your mom wasn't that was her body, and
yeah, it
that's
was just
what
her
you
body.
bury,
Yep.
but that she is no longer there.
Yeah.
So, you bury
Yeah.
her, that's her
Laurel,
body.
you were surprised when you walked in the room, and I was just kind of cleaning up stuff, and
Yeah.
Laurel's like, "Are you okay?"
It's okay to be with a dead
And
body.
I
It's
was
not
like, "Yeah, that's
the
just
usual thing
flesh
for
and
people,
bones.
but
It's not,
yeah.
that's, you can even see the life had just come out of my mom."
Mm,
And I remember I had
okay.
taken a series of pictures with my mother leading all the way up to that point, and at that point, she is a lifeless.
Mm.
Her soul is not there anymore. And so for me, that gives me peace and closure with God, that my mom was okay and that she was starting her eternal journey, and that was a great thing.
I want to share a few highlights that I noticed and had in conversation with the aide that worked for the skilled nursing facility. He was just so wonderful. And but your mom's Christian and played the piano.
Mm.
He told you that just a few days before that she had
Yeah.
or maybe within the week,
No, a
she had
couple
sat at the
weeks.
piano and
They had
played.
pushed her up to the piano and she had played, and he said her muscle memory was amazing,
Yeah,
that she was playing these hymns that he knew from church,
yeah,
and he was like, "I couldn't believe that your mother knew all these hymns," and
yeah.
she was playing. So, yeah, that you don't, you know.
And then there was one of the days before, I think it was a day, 2 days before she got in bed, right? And you did receive a call that your mother hadn't gotten out of
Yeah,
bed in
yeah,
day, right?
yeah,
And that's always a little bit of a surprising call as well. And I think around that time they were increasing the morphine, so there was a lot of change right there. But we had been to see her, and you took your guitar, and her roommate was adorable and a believer,
yeah,
and told you that all she wanted you to sing was "I'll Fly Away," and we had a
yeah,
concert, and your mom was more clear that afternoon
yeah,
than we had seen her in years. I mean,
yeah,
you in years, and she didn't sing, but she was there and she was paying attention. And then she wheeled herself out and we were leaving her. She was crying and she said something about heaven. I remember that. And we just timed it so well that we made a phone call to your niece who had just had a baby. So she got to see her great granddaughter who was born
yeah.
premature and wasn't able to come out of the house and drive over
But
and
she was able
see.
to see her, and then my nieces were able to family came during
Right.
the week because they realized that it was close for my mom and that
Mm,
she was kind of entering that time of her life coming to a close, and
right.
so that was that part of the journey ends and
Right.
the eternal journey begins. So it's, that's the hope of a Christian,
Right.
is that our hope is that death is conquered and that
Mm.
our life will, our life goes beyond the grave.
That's right. And just, we've shared a lot here. We've shared about, the difficulty from the beginning. Your mom really never wanted to move into a facility.
Mm.
And it was hard to get the whole family on board. There were no other reasonable options for her care, presented, or didn't think anyone had the capacity to execute other options. And it was as I mentioned, it was a trial for your mom. It was a hard part of her life, a hard part of everyone's life in the
Mm.
family, and times of close to despair. That why is it like this? The expense. I don't feel like my mom's getting as good care that we're hoping for, that we're paying for, and then
Mm.
the difficulty of moving into state care, state paid care, and all the hurdles that go with that, and hiring, getting an attorney on board, all of that is really, really difficult. And you can just think like, this is futile. Like,
Yeah,
this is just futile. Like,
yeah,
why do we outlive, or why do we live for so long and rely on these medications that do keep us alive to a reasonable age if we have some condition? But then
yeah,
where are the ethics? Where do those begin? When is it okay to say no? But all these questions, I think, were really answered so well in your mom's last few weeks, because we just saw how God beautifully worked things out. And even her roommate, I said to her roommate, I said, we can't be here all the time. We live 45 minutes away and we're working, but you're vigiling with her. And I don't, the roommate didn't really think of it like that, but it's true. She was in that room at every moment. So your mom was not without another person ever
yeah,
in that
yeah.
room, and the aides were in and out. And so everything was really summed up, and I think it couldn't have gone better
No, I
at
mean,
the
it's a
end.
peaceful, transition.
Yeah.
So,
And you have this memory now of spending one of the last hours of your mom's life
yeah,
ministering to her through music.
the
Your mother, who was a musician,
yeah.
taught you how to sing and
And
play.
I
And
get to do that every week with all
yes.
the patients that I get to sing to.
So you said to me just the other day, I see why you're so passionate about the work that you do.
Yeah,
Because being with people at the end of life is just a really special time. And I believe that we never need to doubt that God's faithfulness will be there. And that Christians are really special to have around at the end of life. It really makes all the difference. And we saw that through, the hospice. Everyone on that team was a Christian. You have a Christian family. You had a Christian end of life doula.
Mhm.
Some of the staff members at the facility were Christians. The roommate was a Christian. Your mom was a believer, and God's presence was there, and the promise of resurrection was there every moment.